Yeah. Since he won't be like present online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks, it's 5:31. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here on time. Couple of quick announcements. Food's in the back, as you all know, and drinks. Feel free to help yourself throughout the meeting. Restrooms are back to the right. When you go back there, do you have an emergency? Any?
Oh, yeah, muster point, if something should happen, out this door to the front gate. If we can't, there's another door in the back. Guess that would be northeast corner. We'll just muster at the gates.
And welcome to our fourth convening of the Refinery Technical Working Group. My name is Mona Abood. I've communicated with all of you to get you here today. I'm your facilitator tonight. My role is to just help keep us moving along our agenda, make sure everybody has a chance and opportunity to speak. And we will jump right into it. Our meeting will be about 2 hours tonight. We are recording. We have one member joined online. We have someone from the Air District online who may help with questions. And then, of course, members of the public that are viewing online as well. To quickly go over our agenda, we'll do a round of introductions so that everybody has a chance to meet each other. And then we'll go a little bit of reflection over the last 3 working groups that have convened. And then the chunk of our time today is going to focus on potential rule amendment concepts for rules 1211 and 1212. So Alex will present those today. On your tables, I give you a list of what those amendments are to reference. After the first 4, we'll take a break and have discussion, then we'll do 4 more and have discussion and then have some time there. So we're not going to get through the whole deck all at once. We'll have time to pause. And then I'll also talk about your other packet when we get to that component. And then we'll wrap up at the end of the minute. All right, so let's pause here. Just remembering what our purpose is together. The Refinery Technical Working Group is a forum to discuss error-related matters specific to some rules. We're going to discuss technical aspects to those rules and try to build a shared understanding of refinery flaring and those related rules. Our participation norm, just lifting those back up one more time. We're a collaborative space for sharing what's on our minds. We're going to respect all of each other's voices, one speaker at a time. I'll call on you to speak. Just raise your hand. If we have multiple hands come up, I'll try to keep us in the right order. We want to avoid posturing, and input will inform but not always dictate the rule amendments. And we are having meetings in person for now. So let's just do a round of introductions. Maybe we'll start to the left here and go around. If you want to just share your name, the organization you're with, and maybe a little bit about your role so that we can do we have some new faces here. Vanessa, I'll pass it to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Zamora with the Interactive 15, just supporting on tech for everyone joining on Zoom. I'll be supporting with Zoom tech support. So for those of you that are panelists, feel free to send me a chat and I'm happy to support however I can.
Yeah, I'm Katie Bond. I'm on the rural development team at the Air District for these flare rule amendments.
I'm Jeff Kilbreth. I'm on the North Richmond, San Pablo Community Steering Committee. And I've been on it from the beginning. And I've been interested in these issues since the 2012 fire. I live half a mile from the Chevron refinery. And I fully appreciate how important the refinery is to the economy of California. And but I believe in continuous improvement.
Thank you, Jeff.
My name is I'm an environmental engineer at UGS Energy Martinez. I do a variety of things there, including emissions inventory, different kind of monitoring.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Leonard. I'm the political representative of the State Bidders Local.
Mayor Chuck.
Everyone, Nick Murkowski, United States Workers Social 5, president of the local. Yeah, we represent operations maintenance lab at MRC, Chevron, Marathon Renewables.
I'm Morgan Zellers. I'm in the environmental department at Phillips 66, and I do work.
Hi, everybody. Gary Guerin, I'm the Richmond Staff Attorney of Communities for a Better Environment. And from that, I'm a member of the Community Steering Committee along with Jeff here in Pablo, one of the 2 liaisons of this group. Thanks.
Berg, Chevron Richmond, I'm an air
It's been a long day, y'all. Good evening, LaDonna Williams. I'm with All Positive Possible community-based organization that works throughout the Bay Area. And glad to be here. It's been a long day.
All right.
Hey, I'm Troy Holland with the Marathon Renewables Facility. I'm an air specialist.
All right, good to meet Troy.
I'm Jeff Geiger, with Contra Costa County Hazmat. I'm an engineer on the team that oversees, California Ice Dome Lease Prevention Program and the County Industrial Safety Ordinance.
All right.
Kevin Buchanan with Western States Petroleum Association.
Brad Cole with the Regulatory Development Division. I'm be managing the flare minimization project.
Alex Stone from the Air District, Senior Rule Development.
Victor Douglas, Director of the Regulatory Development Division.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to pass it to a couple folks online. Starting with Ramsey. Can you hear us? Would you like to come off mute and introduce yourself to the group? I see you unmuted, Ramsey, but I don't see any audio coming from you. Maybe we'll. Okay, we'll chat to Ramsey. We also have Chris. Ramsey, we're going to chat to you and see if we can work out your audio. Chris, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris Crowley. I'm a principal air quality specialist in compliance and enforcement, and I'm have about 10 years of refinery experience and specifically flare rule oversight and experience.
All right, great. Well, that is everyone. If Ramsey, we have any luck, feel free to come off mute and we'll tap in here. But we have Ramsey Haddad, who is with Air Products, also joining online. And there are, it looks like 33 other members of the public or various organizations watching and listening online as well. So welcome. Thanks for introducing yourself, everyone. I want to do a quick reflection on our previous refinery technical working group meetings. I just want to lift up for those who haven't joined those previous meetings, or just as a friendly reminder, the first meeting was back in June. Feels like a long time ago now, but that's where the refinery technical working group was initiated, and there was background given on rules 1211 and 1212. We then met again in late August, and at that late August meeting, we worked on our charter as well as a flaring 101 presentation. Just an update on that, the input from the refinery technical working group is informing the development of the flaring 101 educational materials. That's going alongside internal technical review as well as planned community review through AB 617 partners, and I believe labor will be involved in that as well. We want to ensure that these materials are clear and accurate and useful for the community. So those are still in progress. We did give input on the technical background of those, and it's been very helpful. We then met again in August, so that we were joined then by Joe and Kate, so a different team. And that was to look at the improvements to refinery fence line air monitoring requirements. And right now, the Air District is using your input you provided in that meeting to inform the development of their concept paper. And that concept paper will outline the potential rule requirements and questions for public comment. Your input is also helping identify topics for future public workshops. So thank you for your participation to date. More to come on what's updated there. Before I hand it off to Alex, I want to do some housekeeping on what we're going to do next. So we have, like I mentioned, a list of potential rule amendment concepts. There are organized around 2 goals. We'll go through the first goal. There's 4 within that goal. We'll pause for a break to discuss, and then we'll go into goal 2. We'll talk through 2.1 through 2.4, pause to discuss, and then have 2 more and go through that discussion. Also on your stations, you were given a handout. This packet is just the deck in printed format in black and white, and there's space for you to write questions or comments as we go. We don't want to collect this unless you want us to. So if there was a comment that you had or a question that you had that we didn't get to sharing, we will take it back and enter it into the notes. But just so you can follow along, right? This deck does look a little different. It is black and white. There's also a slide number to refer to on the top of each page. So if we need to go back to that slide, we can look at that. Okay, thanks, Jeff.
But do you want these, I mean, we don't have time for everybody to say everything they gotta say. Do you want these handed in at the end of the meeting?
Yeah, we'll take them back if you have
Right.
arguments.
There's a certain efficiency in that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So if you have stuff written down and you'd like us to see it and you haven't had time to share, I'd happily take it. Okay, so I'll hand things off to Alex, just a reminder that these are potential draft amendment concepts and that they will help inform the development of a concept paper on these rules. So with that, Alex, I'll pass it on to you.
All right, thanks, Mona.
Yeah.
So I will now walk through the potential rule concepts we are currently evaluating for rules 12, 11, and 12, 12. So as Mona said, I just want to emphasize that these are preliminary rule concepts and that are at an early stage of the rule development process. And depending on the results of the upcoming research and evaluation, we may or may not move forward with any of these concepts. And the purpose of presenting to you guys is to engage the stakeholders early and identify potential issues and solicit initial feedback to help inform the evaluation work has to come later. Next slide, please. The goal of this flare rule amendment is to first streamline the flare minimization plan update process and improve the reporting and monitoring requirements. Second is to reduce flaring emissions and frequency. The air district will aim to establish requirements that deter flaring and result in quantifiable and meaningful emission reductions from flares when based on that. Next slide. So now we'll be discussing rule concepts on goal number 1. Okay. So there are 4 potential rule concepts under this goal. One is to strengthen and streamline flare minimization plan updates. Second is to amend the reporting requirements for improved data consistency and accessibility. Third is to expand definitions and categories for reporting causes of flaring. And lastly, strengthen the monitoring and reporting requirements. Next slide. So the first potential rule concept I'd like to discuss is triggering updates to the flare minimization plan, or I'll be referring to as the FMP throughout the presentation, only when a violation occurs. The core idea here is to require submission or revision of an FMP only in response to a rule violation. And under this amendment, the air district is considering establishing limits to emissions as well as smokeless operation, which will be discussed later in the presentation. And if a facility exceeds one of these limits, the exceedance would trigger the requirement to submit an update to a flare minimization plan. Current FMP update is done on an annual basis and is not based on any type of limit. And updated FMP could include mitigation measures intended to help address the exceedance and support future compliance with the rule limits. There are 2 primary impacts associated with this rule concept. First, it would improve enforceability since FMP updates would be directly tied to a rule requirement, and the facility would be required to include enforceable mitigation measures to ensure compliance. And second, it would result in resource saving for both the air district and regulated facilities because FMP would only need to be updated when violation occurs, as opposed to being routinely updated on an annual basis. Next slide, please. The second potential rule concept we're looking into is to amend the reporting requirement to improve data consistency and accessibility. The intent is to update the reporting format and content requirements for both causal and flare reports so that the data submitted by facilities are more consistent and easier to review and analyze by the air district. Currently, facilities submit flaring and causal reports in varying formats, and the level of detail and the calculation methods can differ. This causes inconsistency and requires additional time and effort by the air district to review, validate, and interpret the data. Some potential changes under this concept we may evaluate include requiring the use of standardized report templates for both monthly flare reports and causal reports, developing a standardized causal categorization system for causal reports, and requiring the use of prescribed emission calculation methodologies. Similar reporting requirement already exists under South Coast Flare Rule, their Rule 1118. And the anticipated impact of this rule concept includes improved data integrity and accessibility through the use of standardized templates, as well as resource saving for both the air district and regulated facility by reducing back and forth and ensuring that the submitted data follow a consistent format and also emission calculation. Next slide, please. The third potential root concepts under the floor is to amend existing definitions related to cause of flaring and to add definitions to provide greater clarity. The existing rule only differentiates between emergency and non-emergency flaring. And the definition for emergency is shown on the slide right there, and which is described as a condition that is beyond reasonable control of the owner and not reasonably preventable, such as a natural disaster, the war, or terrorism, to provide some examples. All other flaring that does not meet the definition of emergency is considered non-emergency under the existing rule language, which includes both planned and unplanned flaring, and all flaring that are not emergency and that does not comply with the flare minimization plan requirement are prohibited under the rule of law. Next slide, please. So under this rule concept is to amend the existing definition related to causes of flaring. So the potential changes here investigating include amending the definition of emergency to clearly state that flaring resulting from equipment failure or malfunction does not qualify as an emergency. In addition, the Air District is considering adding new definition for malfunction consistent with the federal regulation, as there is an already existing definition there, to clarify that failures caused by poor maintenance or careless operation will not be considered malfunctions. And this concept also includes adding new definition for planned and unplanned flaring events to better distinguish between the two types of flaring. The anticipated impact for this amendment is to improve clarity and consistency how causes of flaring are defined. This in turn supports more accurate reporting as well as clear interpretation of the requirements and stronger enforceability of the law. Next slide, please. So the last rule concept under this goal that I want to discuss is focused on strengthening monitoring and reporting requirements. We're considering updates to existing monitoring and reporting provisions to improve emissions tracking and enhance the enforceability of the key flare operational parameters. And potential changes under this concept that we may evaluate include continuous measurement of total sulfur concentration for surrogate for SO2 emissions, adding a review and approval process for causal reports and flare monitoring system. So Air District reviews the causal reports. The review and approval process for causal reports are not present in the rule right now. And also you're also evaluating requirement of review and approval of monitors for flaring systems to ensure that the monitoring equipment are capable of providing real-time data with minimal lag time to respond to changing the bank gas composition and load. So another item we're considering is requiring online submittal of video monitoring data, such through cloud database to decrease turnaround time for submittals. Currently, the video monitoring data are sent in a format that requires significant staff time and bandwidth. And the anticipated outcomes of these potential changes include increased accuracy and integrity of emissions data and support stronger compliance assurance and enforcement capabilities.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Alex. That was 1.1 through 1.4 under goal 1. We've got some time here to discuss. So I'd love to hear your general reactions, any observations that you had, or questions that you have for Alex's team on these first 4 potential amendments.
And if we could just ask a quick favor to project your voice for a Zoom participant. We have the mic over here so they can hear our presentation, but it sounds a little low. Thank you.
And we've also had Taryn from Valero join online, so welcome, Taryn. Thoughts, questions, reactions? Kevin, kick us off.
Yeah, if no one wants to talk, I'll take the whole time. On slide 11, you talk about rule limits for other metrics for minimization plans. So I guess one of the things that you've been talking a lot about is you guys, I guess the previous flare rule was written 20 years ago. There's just a boatload of data that you guys have had. What has that data told you that has led to having a rule limit for this kind of trigger?
So I mean, That's something we'll discuss in goal number 2, which we'll get to later as that there is a slide specifically discussing, establishing limit. And as for how that came about is first of all, that rule limit is present within the South Coast, and which I'll talk about in goal number 2, but, I can talk about that more about the establishing, emission limits if you're specifically related to that.
Yeah, because when I see a rule limit, I think it's okay if they exceed that limit, considering that a flare is a safety device. Is that gonna become used in enforcement, or is this a trigger?
So I think, it will be, at least what we're kind of looking into is how South Coast has it, is they have an emission limit and they have what's called, they call it, instead of limit, they call it performance target. And how it is if they exceed the performance target, or it is essentially, they have an emission limit based on SO2 and NOx, and SO2 is specific to a non-hydrogen flare. They call it generous surface flare, but for purpose of our discussion, I'll call, just regular, refiner flare that serves the refiner of general processes as non-hydrogen flare. But anytime for those non-hydrogen flare that exceed the limit, on an annual basis, when they exceed the limit, they are required to submit a mitigation. And they're also, when they exceed that limit, they're also required to submit how they will comply in the future, so they don't exceed that performance target in their minimization. So
those hydrogen flares are gonna have a limit when they're required by 13.5 to be used to flare off existing hydrogen from the methane trail.
So my understanding of like how they actually established the limit was they have it so that, they do allow some amount of so it's not based on salt. They have salt limit for non-hydrogen flare.
Right, I'm just talking about the hydrogen flares now.
Hydrogen flare, okay. So I believe they did look at the kind of past emissions data for the hydrogen flare. And they did utilize that to establish some baseline so that, in the event that they don't have any kind of significant flaring event, that they do have, margin to operate as normal. And I think what they aim to do with their kind of establishing those limits are to prevent those kind of unplanned significant events that when they exceed those in those cases that, there is, a limit that they must, and certain requirements to follow in these.
For the hydrogen.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that would really be problematic because you have a rule that requires the refineries use their flares for the hydrogen.
No, the rule sets limits based on the use of the hydrogen flare, but we don't require the technology. People could, there are options, maybe not everyone does it, to reroute some of the material to the refinery fuel gas system, but we don't specifically require the refineries to use a hydrogen flare.
And the one thing I will add is that NOx emissions for hydrogen flare does quite a bit depending on the burner design and by specific facility. So one thing they did look at was they look at 2 different facilities to see how their NOx emissions, one's lower, one's higher. And I believe the reason why they set those limits is looking at the one facility with the lower limit to kind of use them as a basis to require other facilities with the higher NOx emissions to kind of look at their design and follow suit in that to lower the NOx emissions. So I guess as part of this kind of evaluation process, we'll look at what are the hydrogen flares that may be subject to within our Bay Area Air District or within our jurisdiction, and looking at the emissions throughput and their design, and that of course will have to be considered as
Well, I can keep going, but I don't want to hog the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll come back. Morgan had her hand up, and then we'll come back, Kevin, if there's more time, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Go for it, Morgan.
Yeah, it's kind of about both goals. Prior to establishing a rule to regulate, criteria pollutants like NOx or SOx, we need to establish that there is a need for it and that the rule will reduce those emissions, right? Based on California Health and Safety Code. And I don't think we've discussed that aspect of it. We haven't really talked about the data behind the emissions coming from our flares, or how adding limits or increasing the FMP update process will really do that. And like, where are we going, you know, like, we haven't really established that, so I'd like to discuss that more in a future meeting.
And typically, that comes toward the end because as you said, the health and safety code requires us to make these specific findings, necessity being one of them. And we're looking at the universe of, what can be done and what has been done to help reduce flaring from, refineries. And in the process, so in the concept, you know, it'd be premature, like, well, this is absolutely necessary because we don't know if we're gonna use this whole suite of potential methods to reduce options to reduce flaring. Once we get to the point where we kind of that's gelled and we list the things that we believe are going to be proposed to the board of directors, we do that examination to make sure it meets those criteria that are laid out in health and safety code, duplication, but primary one being necessity. And so, but to your point, that's something we have to do, and it's not something we avoid. We do keep that in our minds as we're looking at these potential control options. And we will make that necessity finding if and when we get to the point of making that proposal.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think I'm just interested in the first meeting, we talked kind of about looking at the emissions from flares, but then we never really came back to that. And it seems like maybe flares were chosen because they are a visible thing that the community sees, not because they're a huge source of emissions relative to all the other stuff in the Bay Area. So, yeah, we talked about that and looking at the data. On that.
And that's something we are working on actively. And, you know, as I said, you know, this is very early stage where we're presenting the early rule concepts. And we're analyzing, as it was mentioned, 2 decades of 12-11 monthly flare reports, as well as 12-12 causal reports. And we are looking at them to identify, as you know, at least kind of looking at the past 10 years, there has been a lot of, you know, I think, changes to refinery. Like, for example, there has been some major conversion of some of the refineries around here, as well as there's also some COVID that also affects emissions. There's some major refinery turnaround, power outages. So we're all looking at the 12-11 data on the causal report and trying to link those two and see if there's any kind of correlations of that, something that we can hopefully present and further down the road, maybe in a draft rule package or sometime around that.
And I want to put forth a little clarity. When we look at potential emission reductions that may be achieved by any of the measures that we consider, it's not the relative contribution relative to the rest of the whole inventory in the Bay Area, but whether or not it's feasible if those emissions have an impact and if it's technologically and economically feasible to reduce those emissions.
Okay, and something else on that point, Morgan, at the end of our meeting, I have a short input form for you all to mention topics you might want to cover in future meetings, so definitely add that on there. Jeff, to my left?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of these comments about you can't quite put it together until you do a bunch of basic homework and a bunch of, you know, attempting to get a sense of proportion about what's important. I mean, I read these slides here, and the things that are jumping out at me are for everything except public health. I mean, you know, emergency, non-emergency. Well, I mean, it's not like an emergency flare is bad or an emergency flare is good. You know, it's so what I'd like to get is I look at the causal reports and they don't tell me what I need to know. I think it's just bureaucracy, honestly. But maybe it's a rule that just says refineries, take this a little more seriously, make these reports a little more detailed, get the data like by the hour, you know, because in the really big flaring events, it's scary. And there are like 2, 3, 4, 5 hour windows when the pollution is in a whole different level than, you know, earlier and later and so on. So we need to know where the health impacts are. And we also need to know the proportion of how much the flaring activity and the flaring emissions, how much of it is, how big is it compared to like the rest of, regular operations, which is your point, I think. So I sure don't want to make any decisions about what to do until we've actually got a decent set of causal reports. Hydrogen, non-hydrogen, lots of PM, no PM, whatever, but then we can group them and look at them together and say, now, what do we really want to change here? What's worth the trouble? What's worth the cost? And, maybe it's because I represent the community, but I think everybody here thinks the main point here is safety and public health. So what I get is we're drifting. We know what safety is, but I don't think we know what public health is. And so I'd like to somehow get us to actually have some particular goals, some particular, we want to improve public health by doing X.
We'll stay in that connection between how the rules are described in that connection to public health and some data. Thank you, Jeff. I just want to pause for any response or comment before we move to the next. Okay, thank you. Nick.
Yeah, I just kind of want to blast through first impression. I'm nervous about the change in the frequency of flare minimization plan. I just feel like if there's something to set that off, then you go in and do something, and then there's a point where you're creating more work, more frequency, but the refinery can only make upgrades and on like turnarounds and stuff on major upgrades. It's a hurry up and wait to get a fixed game. So I don't know how that would work, but I'm interested in it. I really love, standardized report templates would be great. Prescribed emissions calculation methodologies would be great. Maybe even explanations so that people from the public can understand what's going on in there. And then this emergency definition is awesome. Again, as representing the workers in the plant, they should not be put into position to try to not flare, in case they have to. And I feel like these definitions are really getting to, the difference between safety and whatever else is going on. So I really like that. The malfunction, planned flare event, stuff like that. It's workers are in a tough place because there's work direction to do stuff, and then there's my members doing what they do and operating the plant, and splitting that hair of who made a bad call to go ahead and continue the procedure for a startup or whatever, and then boom, we got flaring. So now is it a worker that's going to get blamed, or was it a bad call by the company? And I feel like we really have to get into that. And I feel like you're on to something with, breaking out new definitions for malfunction, planned, unplanned, stuff like that. And I appreciate that because things should be improved. I'm wondering if corrective action, preventative action is still a thing to require for each, exceedance and stuff like that. I feel like trying to, get into what caused it is a good start, but what are you going to do to fix it, and how do we hold the companies accountable for fixing that? And then when it happens again, are we going to, establish whether or not that fix should have worked, could have worked, or we need to find something else to do? I don't know how in depth we get to go with that, but
well, that's why we're here for our preliminary concepts, so we can work those details out as we move forward in the rural development process as needed.
Yeah, so I feel like, corrective action, preventative action, putting it right on the company to fix it. I mean, if it's a procedure that just needs to go a little bit slower, let's see the procedure change, and see if that's being followed. And if something like that, continues to happen, then maybe that wasn't enough, and there needs to be, like an equipment upgrade. But there's so many variables and things that you can change. I'm hoping that we get to require the change, basically, through this. It shouldn't all be fines and blame game, but where's the changes? Where's the improvements? Where's the upgrades? And continuous measurement of sulfur. then, I love the review and approval process for the Caliber reports, just to get in there. Yeah, what, the data that's shared is so limited, you don't know what's going on. And I don't know that all that data comes out later anyway, so I feel like the sooner, some of that data can come out, it would have to be required for it to come out sooner or at all. And so, yeah, I just love what I'm seeing here, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I have two hands right now. We've got Chuck and then Carrie, and then I just saw you, Todd, so we'll go in that order.
Yeah, I agree with everything from the community aspect. But I also want to, remind everybody that humans don't make the call when the flaring happens. It's a computer that does. I mean, I spent decades going in and doing safety interlock systems during shutdowns. And it's a computer that triggers the shutdown and the flaring. And sometimes you can't minimize flaring. Flaring is put there to actually to make sure that the community is safe. And how do you, sometimes you have faulty equipment, sometimes, things do happen. And to the next point, and for the community side, I think all this reporting and everything is yes, these things do need to happen. But from the workers that are there at ground zero and for the community, flaring is essential to saving and keeping people safe. And thank God that humans don't make the call when a lot of the flaring happens. Sometimes during routine, when units are going up and coming down, yes, that happens. But there's a reason why the computers make, do a lot of these when A happens, B happens, and C drops a unit. And it's done all by computers.
Okay.
And it does save lives. These units are big. When you go into a hydrogen plant, it's not fun. It ain't no fun starting it up, and it ain't no fun bringing it down. When you work with operations there, this isn't fun, right? This is a job, and I can tell you that it's dangerous. And thank goodness for that flaring is there. And so I appreciate everything that is being done here. But I also want to recognize that sometimes, yes, we want to minimize flaring all we can, but let's recognize that flaring is there for a reason. And first and foremost, it's there to protect the community. And it's there to protect the people that work inside those plants. And it's my members that are there, that are working there. And so to penalize and to say, hey, you only can flare this much, well, I don't know how you can tell a computer where the start and stop is. When, yeah.
Maybe with AI, we could.
Yeah, I can use, honestly, because a computer is not emotional.
Sure.
Data is input, right? And there are certain situations where, humans do, when units come up, units come down. That's different. And then them operators are there and they're really good at what they do.
Okay.
But other than that, thank goodness that those units are done the way they are, and computers do drop and run those safety interlock systems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. I have Chris's hand up too. Did you want?
No, I just want to say we appreciate your comments, and one of the things that we did explain that we wanted to have a definition for what is emergency flaring, and by no means are we trying to tell you not to flare, but once a flaring event occurs, we want to understand how the flaring event did occur and what were the causes of that flaring, so we can see if there's ways to reduce that flaring. Of course, there's going to be emergency. It's an emergency device. We recognize that. Right. By no means are we trying to minimize the flaring associated with emergency events, but there are other flaring events that have a certain level of discretion. Right. And that's where we're focusing our attention.
Right. Sometimes it's just pulling the wrong fuse. seen it happen.
But Chuck, you do know that in Richmond, the flaring went up 3 to 4 times after the modernization project went online.
Right, but I mean,
So,
that's,
so I mean, but
Right.
you just don't, we know that it's about safety.
right.
We don't want to stop safety.
Oh, no, I don't,
I
I,
would like to
Gentlemen,
find
to give,
some.
Chris the opportunity, I think you might have some clarification or response, Chris Crowley with the Air District. You can come off mute and then we're gonna get to Carrie's comment, thank you. Chris,
Yeah.
can you hear us? There,
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Victor was saying. I think everybody at the Air District recognizes the importance of flares and the safety aspect and the extreme importance they serve at a refinery. We're not trying to necessarily change how they operate in an emergency situation or in a planned, flaring event, but just as someone from experience who has reviewed hundreds and hundreds of these flaring causal reports over the years at the Air District, I'd say almost 50% of the ones I've reviewed have been caused by preventative or preventable causes, operator error or poor maintenance, deferred maintenance, not following procedures. So I think that's if my hopes in these rule amendments would be to kind of look at that population of flaring events and to minimize those to the greatest extent possible. And I think my team shares that view. So
Thank you, Chris. Carrie, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, I'll be quick, I hope that we get time for you here before you move on. That, I'll offer just a thought around the safety device piece, but then I do have a question related to 1.1. But with support and concept for 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, a number of which we've been calling our common SMP for quite some time. So the idea of a safety device, agreed, right? Like a flare is better than an explosion. No question about it, none whatsoever. I think too, though, about other safety devices that we hope to not need, like the seatbelt in my car. And if I am constantly only having my life saved because I have a seatbelt in my car, I either need to get my brakes checked, or I need to start driving my car differently. There's an indication when we're relying on these safety devices that there may be other methods that we can be employing here to minimize the actual danger, right? So I hope that can be a part of this context that we're all sharing too. But on 1.1, I wanted to ask a question that's kind of like two sides of the same question. So this idea that FMPs would only be required following a certain exceedance of some type of threshold, right? So my question is, how frequently could that occur? And I suppose that would depend on how the rule is written. So in other words, could that be more than annually even that an FMP is required if various thresholds are crossed? And on the other side, is it also then possible that an FMP would never be written for a plant if those thresholds weren't crossed? And so I say that to say that there may be an interest and reason for having at least a backstop frequency of if a threshold hasn't been crossed still every 2, every 3 years. And FMP is still prepared as to assess what the plant can and the Air District can about the flaring events at a given plant in the spirit of improvement.
Thank you, Carrie. Any thoughts on that initially?
All the refineries have FMPs currently. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they have FMPs. Updates or amendments to the FMPs come on an annual basis.
They don't change much.
Yeah, but amending a plan just to amend the plan because there's a schedule is not an efficient way to operate. If the refineries find some new way to help reduce flaring, some new procedures that may be utilized and incorporated in the FMP, that's great. But typically, I'm going to say from my perspective as an engineer, I'm not sure how often the refineries will feel the need without an incident triggering it to review the FMP and see how it could be improved, but, that's my logic. And so, but when there is an incident of a significant magnitude, one would think like, well, maybe let's go look at the FMP and see what we can do to change that. But it's not unreasonable to, to the point you're making, technologies changes, procedures changes, people can learn from each other. So it may be a benefit on a reasonable time scale to review these things, maybe not every year, but on a reasonable time scale, because we look at our rules and here we are 20 years later reviewing this rule because things have changed in the last 2 decades. In a similar sense, things may change in an arena of flare safety. And so from that perspective, looking at what has changed since the FMP has last been amended and seeing if there's anything worth incorporating in it would be a reasonable idea.
All right, we'll make space for your questions and comments. We'll give it a couple extra minutes if needed. Yeah, we'll give it a couple extra minutes if needed. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Question on slide 12, prescribed emission methodologies. Is this a situation where we're going to be able to use analyzers, or are we going to be forced to use emission factors?
I think that's something we do need to evaluate at this current process, as kind of Rule 1211 does require, sampling, and also federal reg does require analyzer use to some degree. But I think we do need to do kind of as through the rule development process, kind of compares what would the emission look like as emission factor as opposed to using the analyzer data to come up with, calculating emissions. So, I mean, safe to say, SO2 emissions, that's kind of based on software analyzer. I think, probably where we rather use an emission factor and emission factor versus actual analyzer data will matter the most, I would think, is probably the POC emission calculation. So I think that's something we do need to look into and kind of see how it's calculated, but then, kind of do a comparison as we kind of move along.
I will posit this: if you have a piece of equipment like a GCMS, you should use that data because it's going to be a heck of a lot more accurate than an emissions factor any day of the week. So a couple of comments. There seems to be a general perception that flaring benefits the refinery. I don't know any business where you can set a saleable product on fire and it benefits them. The refinery is no different. Toyota dealers don't go out and torch Corollas and have that benefit them. So the refinery is no different. The second thing is emissions from flares relative to the rest of the refinery are tiny. And sooner or later, the district is going to have to be honest about the health risks from those emissions, which are also tiny. So that's going to come out sooner or later. And that's it for now.
Thank you, Sean. Are you sure? That's it for now. I don't want to rush you because you came.
What did you say in the last part of your last sentence?
I said sooner or later, the health risks that are associated with flares are going to be published by the district. And they are likewise tiny because the emissions compared to the rest of the refining are tiny.
Right.
Okay, I had LaDonna give you the floor here and then we'll move on to the next section. So thank you, everyone. And
Okay, so I want to take it back a little bit. First of all, if you take the suggestions, I would appreciate if what I'm seeing on the screen matched what I was reading on here, because it was hard to follow along. Now, also, I'll be honest, the subject matter is hard to follow along as it is. So while I'm trying to figure out, okay, slide 14 and up here saying 1.3, not which slide it is, and by the time I even caught up to get 3 pages ahead of me. So making it more readable for regular community folks. But the second point being, did I hear the machines calculate, or the machines is what releases, not the humans or the workers? But is it not humans who design the machines to begin with?
I think that was something Chuck brought up. Yeah, that's the machines flare. So do the humans design the machines that then eventually make the decision?
Right, but it's the humans that design the machines to begin with, right? And to hear that this flaring pretty much is beneficial to us, as a resident living in a refinery town, which is Vallejo, and we are continually being affected and impacted by flaring and unregulated emissions as has been happening since January. And then we only get notices after several of us have had to see our neighbors and family in ICU, and this is since January. As a matter of fact, as early as last week, at least a dozen residents in a particular area that we were able to document ended up in ICU. We thought it was the conditions because some construction was going on in their apartment complex, but only to find out being on a Bay Air Center meeting that there was this unregulated emissions that were going on, and inspectors are, going throughout Vallejo trying to figure out what's going on. It's really hard to sit and hear how beneficial flaring is when we know that it causes significant harm to our community. So I'm just trying to figure out how these rules relate. How are we really to read this from a public health perspective and actually seeing real life, real time, the devastation that is happening from it? We need some language that really helps us understand, how these rules will benefit us and what sort of inputs that community should be having in these spaces, because we look to the district to be that expert for us, to help us understand what we don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, and I apologize for that, I'm trying to save paper, but I think we made it confusing, so on the next one, we'll fix it. I think that, I wanna keep us moving, Ladonna, and I don't wanna discount what you're saying. There will be space for public comment on this during the concept paper, and I think that's good information for us to take back with the Air District on driving not just what the rule is, but what the impact is and how community sees the public health benefits to it there. I have one more comment on this topic. Was there anything else you wanted to share for me?
No, that's it. I just want to be sure we're not losing the public health component of this.
Yeah.
Because right now it just feels lost. It's not like I feel that is a priority and it should be.
Thank you, Ladonna. Then round us out, and then we're just a couple minutes behind on this section, so we'll have to shave time in a future one.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to echo Bob's comments that, definitely nobody wants to be flaring or, 100%. Been countless meetings where everyone's trying to determine, what could cause flaring and how to stop that from happening. I know, so part of it, I would like a little bit of clarification if possible on the definitions on how they're changing. It kind of sounds like the definition of emergency flaring is going to be shrinking. And we're going to kind of make more stuff fall into this non-emergency flaring category, including like equipment failures that, I guess won't be emergencies, even though if we didn't flare, it would cause an emergency. And then also, I think I heard the term like discretionary flaring that we're trying to stop, and I don't know, I've not really, I like an example of that if you can provide it. I know we always are trying not to flare. I know, the flaring's not really an option I'm trying to do.
In terms of discretion, I need a choice. A choice in flaring is, a process unit may need to go down for whatever reason. There's a certain amount of volume of material that's in that process unit. But, depending on your storage capacity and, compressor capacity, you will determine how much of that you may be able to recover and store or what you may have to flare. And changes in those amounts of capacity and choosing to have that capacity is a choice. That's where the discretion lies. If there's a valve that blows out, of course you're going to want somebody to route that to a flare because you don't know let's try to get this to the compressor and to storage capacity. And your refinery's decision on how much compressor capacity and how much storage capacity it chooses to have for these circumstances is a choice.
No, it's not. Valero has a permit limit on how much they can recover into their recovery system. So,
And then who decides the recovery system?
well, the air district permits that, says this is how much you can recover. So it's on the district staff who are constraining that. So I think it's just important, I think it's important that we understand kind of, the constraints that the refineries have, especially when it comes to the flaring issue. And we would love to have dialogue with staff on how to make that more functional to where, nobody wants to flare.
Well, I would really love to know how come Chevron just prints the economic analysis of why it's too expensive to expand the storage thing that it's the same thing every year. And I just, nobody seems like they're thinking about whether it would be a good idea to expand.
Well,
And if it is, an artifact of our permitting processes, then it's something we can look at in this, process to see if that could be changed to expand that capacity.
I'm gonna keep us moving. Nick, I know you had something. If you have any other comments on this section, I'm gonna invite you to write them down, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back or collect it and keep going
Just
from
one
there.
quick question for Victor, concept paper, do you guys know when you're gonna issue that?
Yeah.
He's typing it now.
Yeah. We're working on it.
3 minutes though.
We're behind.
Yeah.
We're anticipating to get it out like in April timeframe, so we are working on it right now, so. Anticipating.
No.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we are losing him.
Yeah, there will be some personnel changes in this project, which we'll get to, in the presentation.
But thank you for your discretion.
Yeah. We're gonna go into goal 2 now, folks. Just a reminder here, this one, we have four potential concepts to talk through, then we'll pause for discussion, and there's 2 more towards the end. We've lost 8 minutes, so we're gonna try to make it back up as much as possible. So just keep in mind, whatever you write down, we'll collect, but with Alex, I'll pass it to you, for this part of the presentation, and thank you all for your comments and questions in the discussion.
Yeah, so I feel like we did get into quite a bit about a lot of some of the items discussed here, but, so under goal number 2, the goal is to reduce flaring emissions and frequency. So some of the key rule concepts that we're considering is to incorporate key requirements from the EPA's refinery sector rules, establish new annual flare emission limits, and establish requirements for implementation of emission reduction measures for emission reduction exceedances, and establish mitigation fee for emission exceedances. And then we'll have a brief pause after that and for discussion. And we'll also be discussing the other 2 rule concepts, which is require submittal of causal report based on additional triggers and require third-party audits for facilities. Next slide, please. So first rule concept that is under considered under this goal is to incorporate key requirements for EPA's refinery sector rules, specifically the subpart CC requirements for flares. Under this concept, the air district is incorporating federal requirements related to destruction efficiency and smokeless operation, including parameters such as minimum net heating value, or referred to as NHV, or flare tip velocity requirements. Similar requirements are already present within the South Coast flare rule, and also federal regulation already require monitoring of these parameters. As a part of this amendment, the Air District is also considering requiring facilities to report these key operating parameters in monthly flaring reports, as well as council reports. The primary impact associated with this rule concept would be increased enforceability of requirements related to the proper operation of flares by making critical operating data more transparent and readily available for an Air District. Next slide, please. So under this rule concept, and I believe this is the meat of the rule amendment concept that we're looking at and has been discussed, is the Air District is considering establishing an annual limit for flares. A similar annual limit requirement have been present and included in the flare regulation adopted by South Coast and have been implemented since 2005. So they've been implementing similar requirements for about 2 decades. Specifically, South Coast 8 communities rule include SO2 emission performance targets for non-hydrogen flares and NOx emission performance targets for hydrogen flares. As part of the continued rule development, the air district would evaluate several types of potential annual flare limits, including annual limits similar to those in the South Coast Rule 1118, annual volumetric bank gas limits, as well as declining annual emission limit over time. South Coast State Community Rule 1118 has a specifically declining SO2 emission limit for non-hydrogen flares. Further evaluation will be needed to determine how these limit would apply from both emergency and non-emergency flaring events. Then the air district would also need to consider a clear definition for non-hydrogen hydrogen flare as that's currently absent in the rule. In establishing these potential limits, the air district would consider emissions data submitted under Rule 1211, as well as causal reports submitted under Rule 1212 for non-hydrogen flares. Overall, the primary impacts associated with this rule concept would be reduced emissions and decreasing frequency of flaring. Next slide, please. Another rule concept the air district considering is focuses on implementation of emission reduction measures following an emission exceedance. Under this concept, the facility could be required to conduct more comprehensive evaluation of potential emission reduction options. The potential emission reduction measure that can be feasibly implemented may vary by facility and could range from enhanced emissions monitoring and optimization of flare operations to improve the management of flare gas sources, including increased capacity for refinery fuel recovery and reuse. We're exploring option to require more stringent emission reduction measures should apply in cases of larger exceedances. We would need to do a comprehensive analysis of potential emission reduction measure that may be implemented at a flare, consider such requirement. Overall, the anticipated impact of this concept would be reduced emissions and potential decrease in frequency of flaring. Next slide. As for this rule concept, and the air district is evaluating whether to require facilities to pay a fee when an emission limit exceedance occurs. A fee provision that impose what are referred to as mitigation fees have been included in South Coast HMD, as I mentioned before, since 2005. So this is not a new approach.
2005?
Yeah, 2005. One aspect we're exploring is whether the fee structure could be scaled such that higher exceedance would be subject to higher mitigation fee. And this is also an element present in the South Coast rule. The intended impact of this concept is to provide an additional incentive to minimize exceedances, which may help reduce overall emissions and potentially decrease the frequency of flaring over time.
So let's take till like 6:50 here and try to add 5 minutes to this discussion since we went fast there. Thanks, Alex. Same question here to begin. General reactions, observations, or questions you'd like to share. I want to open first to folks that we didn't hear from on the last round. That would be like Troy, Jeff. Anything to add here? Okay. I saw Todd's hand go up first, and then Devin, and Carrie. Go for it, Todd.
So looking at slides 41, requiring emission reduction measures when exceeds occurs. I'm reminded of a recent example where we had an upcoming turnaround. Chevron went to get a permit that would actually allow it to degas a unit without flaring. However, the district sat on the permit for 6 months and decided to issue it 48 hours before the turnaround, which is way too late to get a thermal oxidizer. So everyone's already trying to do these things. Well, we can't get permits. So when I see this saying, oh, mitigation measures, how long is it going to take to get a permit for these things? The answer is years.
And to the point you're making, one of the things, as you probably know, and our executives have emphasized quite a bit, we're trying to increase the efficiency of our permitting program. That's one of our major goals in the strategic plan. We're working on that, and if you guys have ideas to help us out, help us to identify ways to do that, I'm sure the engineering, and that's where Alex is going, staff would be happy to hear that. One of the things we're working on that as the agency. We know it's a big problem. You guys pay fees and you guys should get your permits in a reasonable time.
Yeah, and I know you guys are working on it. The point of my story was really to say Chevron and other refineries weren't sitting around thinking about, you're not gonna do anything about this. We're already proactively trying to do things. However, there's issues, so.
Thank you.
So on that, Victor, the staff have established a permitting task force, which the regulated community is sitting on, including myself, and there's a permitting ad hoc subset of the board of directors, so that process is in motion.
Okay. Devin, thank you, Todd. Thank you,
Yeah.
Deb.
I just, when we're talking about reducing emissions, I think this wasn't already said, but I want to reiterate, like, flaring is a extremely small portion of the total facility emissions. I just did the average for the last like 8 years of both teen emissions inventories, and I think like SOx and NOx, it was 1% each total for the facility. As we talked about, and all of that is, flaring is already something we don't want to be doing and aren't trying to do. It's, lighting our product on fire, as was said. So we talked about, I don't know, like fees to try to reduce that. I mean, I think we're already kind of hit with fees when we flare because we're burning our product up. We feel that financial impact already. I don't know, increasing that. I don't know. I don't really like we're really small portion of our emissions, and also that costs a lot of money to flare that gas already.
Well, I would posit during a major flaring event that during the duration of the flaring event that emissions, especially the most harmful emission, which is PM, would be much greater than the refinery-wide emissions of PM for during the event, because an episodic exposure to PM is extremely harmful. It sends people to the hospital with asthma, or even seeing flaring and the potential of that plume intersecting your community has also a psychological effect too. So while averaged over the year, they may not be orders of magnitude difference for that duration during major events like the 2012 fire has a major impact. And these are types of events we recognizing, yes, indeed, it's an emergency, and if flaring didn't occur, it could have been much worse. But when there are other flaring events, if we can find ways working with you to reduce that, it's a benefit to the communities that are living nearby to reduce that flaring because it happens often enough that they're greatly concerned, and one of their number one concerns that was listed in the Path to Clean Air that was produced by the Richmond, North Richmond, San Pablo CSC. So making that comparison doesn't diminish the concern.
And I gotta say something about this in Richmond. I only know Richmond in this. But Chevron, this ties back to the flaring 101 thing. What are we trying to say to the community? I believe that there's 1 or 2 flaring events a year, not 21 or 25, there's only 1 or 2 flaring events in a year that have a public health impact, but we don't take it seriously. We don't do anything to explain it to the community. We don't, like when all the kids are on inhalers, have episodes during that one event. Because for 8 hours, like Victor was saying, there was a lot more PM, there was a lot more, stuff in the air. You know what I'm talking about, right? Which ones, the one by Thanksgiving, et cetera. What we need is, I'm back to the public health thing, I wanna have a story for the community about how we're focused like a laser on public health. And it's not about all the flares. It's about like 1 or 2 flares, a year.
To that example, when you have large flaring events, at least recently, they are due to a power curtailment. And so everything we talked about today would not apply. And that's the reality.
Maybe so,
There's no
but
giant battery to run a refinery.
And we can explain that to the community, right? But we have to admit that there is a health impact from those flaring events.
irrespective of whether or not, it was an emergency, wildfires aren't wanted, but they still have an impact, an effect. And, you know, if there's ways to reduce the potential for a wildfire that's reasonable, then one would think you will want to do that. And I think the same hopefully applies in considering how to reduce flaring, both emergencies and non-emergency flaring.
Carrie, and then Morgan, and then Chuck. Did I see a hand over there? Was it Jeff?
Yeah, I want to go first again, but.
Okay, but we're gonna go in order. Kevin, Carrie. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, support for, 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. Just a brief comment on, 2.2, that's slide 20, and another one on 2.3, slide 21. So on 2.2, we're glad to see that the Air District is thinking about the model from the South Coast and setting NOx targets, given the, thermal NOx production that can happen at hydrogen flares. So really appreciate that rather than some belief that hydrogen flares don't have any impacts whatsoever. On 2.3, requiring, and specifically requiring a more detailed evaluation of potential emission reduction measures. Flare gas recovery systems are something that we've been talking about for a long time over many comments on the FMP annual updates. And so that it also highlights ways that other portions of Air District rules or supporting documents may need to be updated. For example, if there are outdated calculations for cost effectiveness that we're relying on as various measures are being considered, just to think, you know, what are the other barriers here to actually achieving meaningful reductions?
Any thoughts on that, or we can keep going with comments?
Yeah, I think so.
Morgan, thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, so, I'm kind of on the same page as, Jeff. I think, it would be nice to see the data on the public health aspect, right? We're also all community members, even though we all work for Refinery, so that'd be interesting to see. And then going back kind of to California Health and Safety Code, you're not supposed to be duplicative of the federal rule, so, some reasoning behind that would be interesting. And then on the limits, which, again, I really don't want an operator of refinery to have to make the decision between violating a Title V permit and saving the lives of his coworkers or the community, right? We don't want that. So that's one point. But also vent gas limits aren't really, and that's not equivalent to emissions, right? Because different things flow down to the flare. So, I'd strongly consider that one. I think if you look at the trends on the Air District website, sometimes vent gas flow is high, but the emissions are lower than they have in the past. So that would be interesting to check out. And then the cost benefit analysis for some of these mitigation measures should strongly be considered. I think we're in a really interesting time in the Bay Area, right, where we're having refineries leave, shut down, transition to being renewable facilities, right? We want to be conscious of the cost to operate here.
We always do a very detailed economic analysis, and which includes, it doesn't use the exact words that you use, a cost benefits analysis, and basically the cost effectiveness and also the cost impacts to the regulated entity. That's required, that's part of the social economic analysis. And this is something we do in earnest. And so that's going to definitely be part of this process.
I just really wanted to comment on 2.4, and that's established fee for emission exceedances. If it's a computer that's flaring, the computer has no emotion when they do this, but if it's a human that has to make the decision, if it's an operator that has to make a decision on whether or not there's been a flare, and he thinks about a fee that has to be paid, this isn't something that you really want running through a human's mind. And he's thinking about what it's going to cost versus the community or the workers out there in the field. Because that unit can be seconds away from being a catastrophe. And this is something that, you know, like I said, I represent half the workers that work out in these facilities. And I just think this is just this is just a bad idea to put a fee on flaring. And it's really unfair to put that type of responsibility on the human that has to make that decision on whether or not they're gonna actually press the button to actually flare.
For clarification on that,
Is cumulative or single event?
cumulative for the annual, like for each year.
Okay.
Yeah. A quick comment on that was that, South Coast, they don't count the emissions from emergency events. So there's some leeway there. So they're looking at strictly, emissions that are not associated with emergencies.
Yeah, but you don't always know that at the time. What's an emergency, who tripped it, what happened?
Right, that's what's evaluated on an annual basis, not like right after.
Right, you know what I mean, you just,
Yeah.
you don't know.
South Coast Rule 1118 does have exemptions for startup shutdown and what they call operational need, so.
Yeah, Yoan, right.
I've got some very patient waiting commenters. I'm gonna go in order. We've got Kevin, then Jeff, then Nick, and Morgan again, if they, yeah. So, Kevin,
Okay,
Thank you.
so we talked about reducing emissions. Has the air district estimated emissions for the flare? So, answer that, because I know we're running out of time. Pardon me. The other thing is, on the mitigation fee, is that gonna be separate from any kind of enforcement action fee? Or fine? So is it-
Yeah, it is separate. It's not considered, a penalty.
So if you flare and you get enforcement and you get a penalty for flaring, are you still gonna pay the mitigation fee also?
Well, it depends on if, it exceeds triggered the mitigation fee
So they're completely separate and you could give both.
or neither.
all right. Jeff, and I see Terrence's hands up too, just.
I guess my question is, if there's already limits, penalties and permitting requirements, how often are exceedance concerns brought up through labor? What was the question?
Sorry.
How often do concerns about reaching some sort of regulatory threshold, how often are those concerns brought to labor? Like, you know, we already have permit requirements that operations is, they have to, you know, stay within. Are concerns that,
I wish it was more often. I mean, we're subject to work instruction, you know, like given a direct order to do something, so, I'd like to see this get pushed up to, you know, the management and the planning and, you know, are we in a hurry or not? The comment about losing money, to flaring, I mean, how much money are you gonna make by starting the unit up a day earlier? And throw that into the calculus of $1 million a day. I mean, everybody just walks around like, we're gonna lose $1 million a day. if We don't get this running, so, and I just wanna clarify the Chuck point, the computer, you know, you're putting gas and liquid into the flare and it's able to pump liquid back and compress gases back into the units. It's only when that system is overwhelmed, does the computer kick it through, the flare system. So there's plenty of human beings touching all kinds of stuff, tiny little bits and whatever, any waste or whatever we have to do to clean or whatever it is, we're gonna hook into the flare header and send it to the flare, but it's probably gonna get, you know, come back in. So workers don't typically know what the threshold's at. You know, there could be better communication with how much, you know, are we close or whatever's going on there, but workers are doing their best, but again, I did work direction to have a job tomorrow, you know, especially with the turnover that we've had in the last 5 years, you know, half the operators are 5 years experience or less. So they just, what that means is if I tell you to do something, you're probably gonna do it. It's the more experienced people that can push back. So what I would say, I'll put this on my form for ideas for next time, whatever, but stop work authority for environmental concerns. Is that a thing? You know, we can have a little discussion on that later, but I can tell you right now, it's gonna be a big struggle. Health and safety is hard enough. You put your job on the line to stop work authority for your own health and safety. saying, hey, I'm not gonna do this because it's gonna go over the limit. I would love to see more in here about, retaliation toward workers who prevent things from happening and having, fees and fines for something like that. And that way now we've got 300 operators that are, deputized BAAD emissions people, to prevent that stuff. So, I love your question. I wish it was a lot more to what everybody was doing and thinking. And it's just not there right now. So thank you for asking.
Did you also have, did you cover your comments
I
you're
did.
gonna give to as well? Okay, was that everything from you, Jeff? All right, Taryn, I wanted to see if you can come off mute and share your comments. Can you hear us? Hi, Taryn.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, we can.
Okay. Apologies, I'm not there in person. I just had two quick comments. One, thanks, Kevin, for bringing up that Valero does have a limit on how much flare gas we can actually recover. So having a limit on that end and then also having a limit on flaring, I don't really know what to do with that. Then my second comment, and Todd Osterberg kind of brought this up, that, if we're modeling after the South Coast 1118 rule, they do mention essential operational needs. And we have talked about flaring due to safety reasons, but, there are also needs to flare whenever you have material that is incompatible with your fuel gas system. That can cause a lot of other issues and emissions in other areas. If we're modeling after the South Coast regulation, is the district also planning to put in exemptions for those operational needs or startups and shutdowns towards those performance targets?
Just a quick comment on your second one. That's something we'll look into as, Todd pointed out, there is certain, carve out for essential operating needs, and that's something we'll, explore as part of the further rule development process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn. Gonna keep us pushing. We have a couple more slides and then we'll spend the rest of the time up until about 7:25 for discussion. If we need to go in to the last minute, we will pass out the things that we discussed. So Alex has a couple more slides on our last two potential amendment concepts. So Alex, why don't you take those?
Yeah, so two more rule concepts, bear with me here. So potential rule concept will require, require submittal of a causal report for flare events based on additional triggers. We are considering evaluating other scenarios where causal reports may be warranted, including cases where visible emission limits or flare tip velocity limits as required by federal regulation are exceeded. Currently, the only criteria we have for causal reports are based on daily bank gas volume and SO2 emission limit. The intent of this concept is to identify underlying causes of these types of flaring events that may require causal analysis to prevent such event in the future. The expected impact would be reduction in the frequency of specific flaring events related to these triggers, as well as expansion of the existing reporting requirements to improve transparency regarding these flaring events. Next slide, please. The final rule concept that we're evaluating is potential requirement for third-party audits for flaring compliance. And under this concept, facilities will be required to retain independent auditors to verify compliance with the applicable operational and regulatory requirements related to flaring. Third-party audits are not a new approach and have been routinely used in EPA consent decrees as a tool to help ensure compliance. We're currently considering potential triggers for when third-party audits will be required, recognizing that such audits require appropriate oversight to ensure they are conducted in a manner that meets their district standards. Example of audit triggers we may evaluate include cases where a facility has recurrent flaring from the same source or process area within a defined period, cases where an emergency flaring that exceeds certain emission or bank gas threshold, or cases where air district determines that the air district internal audits performed for the purpose of determining corrective actions identified in the causal reports or the FMP are not sufficient to prevent future flaring events. The anticipated impacts of this concept include reduced emissions and a decrease in frequency of flaring, and supported by independent verification that facilities are managing their operation in accordance with the rule requirements and their FMP requirements.
Thank you, Alex. Kevin's got his hand up first. He's ready to go. Let's go, Kevin.
Thank you very much. So, Alex, you mentioned something about an SO2 limit on, slide 24, the problem report for operators. I didn't quite catch what you were saying with SO2.
Maybe based on daily bank gas volume or, yeah, SO2 emission limit.
So that would be, you would have an SO2 limit as, on what you're thinking?
I think, that maybe, I think, you know, I think that's, I think that's a good point, that we have existing SO2 threshold, so that may not be actually the best metric for triggering, but I think the other two kind of metric I would probably consider kind of looking at is, you know, the visible emissions, the flare tip velocity and kind of visible emission related criteria, but yeah, I would agree with, SO2 threshold is already present in the law.
And then on the third party audits, on the slide 25, you mentioned the internal audits are insufficient. Is that internal to the district?
No, internal to the facility.
Oh, okay, so that's what that means.
Yeah, that is more.
All right. Is everything, Kevin? We're gonna move to Todd. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Just a quick question. Alex, sounds like you're powering this after sun goes with SOX and NOx. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I've like the emission limit, yes, and that's kind of all tied together with like, yeah, exactly.
Are you considering a more of like South Coast has a target, performance target,
Right.
a little bit different than an emissions cap. Because it's based on a facility output.
It is, it's scaled based on, well, like, I guess I scale as, I'm kind of presenting this as an annual limit, but it is based on their design capacity, which doesn't change, so. My understanding that it's an annual limit essentially, and it doesn't change any time of the year, because it's not based on actual throughput or anything like that.
Yeah, I forget the words that South Coast uses, but some sort of design capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, Morgan, go for it.
So I'm just gonna start on the last point, the third party audits. I think that's what the inspectors are already doing. Like I interact with them every time we have a flaring event and they look at all the data and everything. So I'm not sure why we would duplicate that process, as the inspectors are already doing that. And then here. I just wanted to also point out, like, flaring, it's an emergency device, right? Like seatbelts, right? I'm not sure, or maybe I'm not aware of other safety devices that the air district has put limits on. Like emergency backup generators, right? Is there a limit on the hours those operate in an emergency situation? And I know you said emergency would be exempt, but the emergency definition on the screen is very, very slick. So, I think when we look at the data and we look at the flaring events in the buckets that we've defined from the FMPs, that's, we should take all that into consideration.
And again,
Share the difference of like third party and the inspector.
yeah, inspectors aren't third party, they're work for the agency, so the third party would be independent of both the agency and the refineries. And to the point you're making, this is preliminary, this is a discussion, we're not going to the board tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that's why we're having these conversations, to get your input, to see what's best for our region and our district.
Yeah, I guess my point is the inspectors are doing a pretty thorough job already, so, I guess that's good for them. And then I also, I'm sorry, I forgot your name from County Health.
Tiger.
Okay, they do, board operators do see emission limits when they operate, at least if I refinery, I think probably the other ones too. But like if you're gonna come up on a NOx limit, they'll see that, they'll get an alarm report. So it would
Emails.
Yes, you
Like,
get
you're
emails.
getting close to a limit.
But yeah, to Nick's point, like if you're in the field, you're not seeing. So, okay.
Just something to add in terms of like, I know there has been cases where there has been disagreements whether a specific reportable flaring event is an emergency or not between their district and facility. And if there has happened and something, an info related to that, when that happens, specific event, that'll be helpful from the rule development perspective, so we can consider where those disagreement lies when we look to amend the definition for emergency. So that will be helpful in that.
Sorry, Carrie, I skipped you, went out of order. My apologies.
No,
Carrie.
And I think it works well for it to follow, Morgan's comments there. So on 2.6, I'm curious what the air district's thoughts are on the availability of third parties that have the technical expertise needed to do an effective job without having,
Conflicts of interest.
conflict of interest, I would say.
I can comment on that.
Okay.
I mean, this of course has came up in context of Rule 1118, I'm sure you're all aware. And, yeah, I mean, there's a very, that's a very difficult ask in my opinion. Just for example, you're asking someone who has the expertise to do a third-party audit related to flaring system at a refinery, but has no experience or ties with the refinery. And I think, yeah, that is something that's the challenge that we're aware of and a concern that has been brought up in context of, like I mentioned in Rule 1118. So that's something, we do need to consider, whether you also want the best person or third party for the job, but if your focus is to kind of focus on not having any compliance, then you will be limiting the pool very much for, when they will be actually be able to perform their job, and how expensive would that be? Or would they even be available nearby these facilities to conduct the audit? So those are constraining factors when we're considering, such requirements, third-party audits. And we're also kind of aware that even we have a third party involved, that the oversight by the air district is also resource intensive, and also facility involvement is also very resource intensive on all sides. So those are kind of my consideration, kind of looking into this kind of brainstorming and validating such rule concepts.
Do you have other questions, Carrie?
About this,
Okay.
with just the state support for 2.5 and 6.
256, thank you. Okay.
I gotta say, I'm a little lost on what the value of the third party audit is at all. I mean, I just can't imagine that anything that would be valuable would be more easily obtained directly from Chevron if we made it short and sweet and get an agreement. I mean, why would a third party person after the fact? Like, what's the value add?
I mean, so I can kind of speak to, on the vague terms, like looking at causal reports, right? Like looking at causal reports that happened in flaring. And if I see, report a flaring event due to an equipment issue at a specific unit at just at February of certain year, and that happens again in April, and it happens again, and they're kind of submitting same corrective action preventative measure, then it's like one of the things that we think as an air district, how can we ensure that they're actually implementing those preventative measure corrective actions? And I get there's some value there, having a third party involved where they can ensure.
I mean, I just would have thought that if we had a better template for the causal report in the first place, it kind of required the refinery to give the core key information completely, honestly, that, we just could like eliminate this whole idea. I don't know, it just doesn't smell like a good use of money to me. I mean, because I do think all those issues you were talking about before are very real. I mean, about, really skill set. I mean, all the things we were just saying, you guys. So, I mean, I just think you gotta try to sometimes think outside of the box and try to simplify things. That's not a strength of the air district. But I do think it's a strength of Chevron if they want to do that a bit. Simplify things.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Do you have other comments, Todd?
No, I mean, we have an internal team that does these and I've not been part of it, so.
Okay. Okay.
I would love to be able to tell you I don't know. But, it's a multidisciplinary team, ops engineering, HSE, process safety folks that look into these. So I just can't comment because I'm not.
But presumably they could fill out a better template.
I mean, these folks are experts in their units. But I can't comment on the quality or any other thing. I assume they're doing a great job because they've been doing this for years. Also, my understanding from speaking with them is we don't have repeat flaring events caused by the same equipment, the same set of circumstances. And like every time we have to do it, then it's from a new thing. It's like, okay, now we gotta go, all right. You know,
Yeah. And from my understanding of this proposed amendment, it's when it's a repeat cause reported without that corrective action again. Is that
we
right?
just, my understanding is we just don't have those.
Okay,
So it's not like, all of last year, we had the same darn thing happen, like, my understanding is that doesn't happen.
okay,
It's always a little bit different.
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Question more to the area district, we can talk about streamlining reporting for data consistency. What are some of the challenges you guys see with data? Either not enough or way too much or all over the place?
I think it's probably Chris would be best to speak to that since he's.
Sorry, Chris, can you hear us? You still with us, Chris?
He is.
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, kind of going back to data consistency and streamlining reporting, what are some of the challenges that the air district sees with data? For example, that you didn't weigh too much, you're getting not enough, what is kind of, where does it stem from, I guess, what I'm asking?
I'd say it's just how the data is presented. What data is being reported. Are all the emissions associated with sweep gas in the flare being reported? Some facilities are reporting it, some aren't. Some are reporting in units of standard cubic foot for pollutants instead of concentration basis. So, I mean, there's all kinds of, we get just a plethora of different approaches on reporting the data. So to streamline it across the board for all facilities would be beneficial. And to be clear from a rulemaking perspective, to be clear on what is expected in the rule is necessary.
Thank you, Chris. Is that helpful, Jeff?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just thought just occurred to me, I wonder if this data consistency issue can start using tools like AI to streamline that or help it along. I mean, I understand the use of standardized reporting templates, that makes sense. But if you have a long report and if someone at the district has got to sift through this thing, I wonder if we can bring some AI tools to bear on it. Just a thought.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, like categorizing the flaring events and making the reporting process more of a template as opposed to the narratives that we typically get, and I haven't gone deeply into the flare reports, makes it much easier to review if there's consistency in how it's reported.
We have some time here, folks. Do we have other comments or questions?
I have a question. You said that you record these. When and where is that available?
The recording of the meeting? I believe it's available on the Air District site.
Is it underneath the refinery technical working?
Yep.
Group? Oh, okay. So was that about a week turnaround or?
It's been a
Just
little
because a few
less,
folks
call it a week, we've tried to get up there quicker.
Okay.
Like we send it, the web team has to get it up. There's a queue, but about a week. Good.
So I got one.
Yeah,
So,
I know you do. Go for it.
on the first part of it, you said that there were gonna be prescribed emission calculation methodologies. Is that gonna be in collaboration with the refineries? And the reason I asked that is one of the things I get feedback a lot on, especially when it comes to emission inventories every year, and I know there's different staff that do that, but it seems like sometimes, more often than not, the emissions are calculated higher. No, never lower, but they're calculated higher, and so having some type of collaboration or some type of maybe even cooperation would be better. Is what we don't want to see as WSPA is have the district say, this is your calculation methodology and you just need to live with it. We'd like to not have. So just food for thought.
Or standard, like in the federal regs or TRI, you're supposed to be using best available data. It seems like that would make sense here. Like if you don't have the latest fanciest piece of equipment, that's fine, but then you go down to the next tier, and that's what's already in. If you look at the 1215 PREIG Petroleum Refinery Emission Inventory Guideline, there's already a data hierarchy that says, all right, best data is this, so then if you don't have that, you go down, right? So.
Okay. Okay, well, while you're all thinking about that, thinking about additional comments or questions, I just wanna go through a couple of things really quickly. The Air District is taking your input today into consideration into their draft concept paper for rules 1211 and 1212. Once that is drafted, there will be a public comment period and public workshop on this, and that's, as Alex mentioned, we're looking at an April timeframe for these things, give or take. What Vanessa had passed out to me was sort of an exit survey, let's call it. We don't have a set topic or date or time for our next meeting. And so we thought this was a good time to pause and say, we've gathered 4 times, we've gathered some input, and I would love to hear from you all on topics that you would like to consider reconvening on. There's also some questions about preference and efficiencies within there too. So if you can fill that out, and I will collect it before you leave, and we'll take it back and discuss how we want to convene next and on what topic with that input. All right, we have about 15 minutes left. I want to remind us that there's food left in the back. And I want to leave just some more time for additional questions if you have them. But I think that wraps us up otherwise. Any
Yeah,
other, I guess, announcements, yeah?
Yeah, I was just gonna add for the Flaring 101 information. Once we get to a point we can share that, we're gonna share that with the whole group. With the corridor group and with the CSC, we plan on going either to those whole groups or preferably a smaller group. Get additional comments as well as with the union folks, Nick, we had talked about. And all the information that comes out of those will be shared with the whole group. I don't know if we need any other convening of this meeting for that, but we will be sharing that in the future.
Do you see the Flaring 101 idea as being completely separate for having a plan for making things better?
It's separate than the rulemaking process itself. It's what the whole concept is to make the idea, the concept of flaring more digestible to the general public. For those folks who don't know what flaring is at
Yeah,
all.
I think I mentioned this before, but I gotta tell you, it's kind of a real waste of time to tell the people of Richmond about kind of how flaring works without having a general attitude, a general set of goals for making it better. The 101 stuff is very valuable if it helps explain what's important and what's not important. Like the thing I was saying before about how like there's one event a year that's like qualitatively different than all the other flaring events. And that the flaring stuff really is small potatoes in general compared to refinery operations. You know, people need to know that stuff. But, you know, it's not what they care about. What they care about is that 90% of our census tracts are in the top decile for asthma, you know, and they want to know whether flaring has anything to do with it. And they also, as I think people have mentioned, it's the psychology, you know, of like too much flaring, you know, or one really bad flaring event. So what's the Air District focused on? It's gonna backfire if this is a standalone thing that isn't tied to at least some general goals for improvement.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jeff. And I think the goal of this Flaring 101 is that first step in that journey. For those who don't know anything, we need to be able to start somewhere from a.
But what I'm telling you is nobody wants to hear it.
Okay.
They need to hear it. But it's not like they really want to hear
it. I don't know.
I don't know if I agree with they don't want to hear. I don't know if I agree with that.
Without some goals?
Well, I'm just saying overall. But I would like to suggest something that worked for us in the past. This year had its meaning and time flies, doesn't it? It was 2017, 2018. And actually, it was a little earlier than that, because we were trying to stop a cement plant being built in the way, or, an Irish out of country, cement facility that was coming through the forest and Black decided town. And if we, with the help of the air district, stopped this cement plant from being an additional pollution source in our community, and in an area with some of the worst health outcomes in the state compared to other communities. And what Victor did, although I fought with him and his team, because I'm always battling y'all, but they brought us together in a forum. I forget how many hours it was.
At least 3.
3 hours, and he gathered various departments of the air district. Now, we didn't have a large turnout because we had some infighting going on with the community wanting to posture against each other. But the few community folks that did show up, it was really a benefit for them to hear things like, what was flaring, or what was rules and regs with your department, correct?
Rules, compliance and enforcement, and engineering, which are the 3 divisions that work closely together to basically ensure that whatever we put on the books, or when new sources come in, that they're come in or reduce their pollution to the lowest levels possible. That's a big quote, because there's a lot that goes into that term, possible.
And those are mostly the departments that community level does not engage in. And I don't think it's so much that they don't want to hear it or don't want to be a part of it. If, all of the T's aren't crossed and I's dotted, it's that they don't know.
Yeah.
The material is so above your head, either you're gonna fall asleep or not show up at all, but it's very important decisions being made, that impacts our health. And at the end of the day, if we're not in these spaces and y'all get to talk amongst each other, and it's like, hey, how is this, impacting us? So I would like to suggest again, some sort of similar process that was set up for communities to be able to come together and fill these questions to you guys, not necessarily just in a setting that's only the refinery focus, but also how these different departments play a role, and given enough time for us to ask you and get some real answers to the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you, LaDonna. Kevin?
As far as I know we're supposed to fill this thing out, as far as the next topic, I'd really like to see staff present what they see the emissions are from the flares. I mean, there's a recurring theme in a lot of the slides about reducing emissions. You guys have 20 years of data, and I know during the first technical working group, we said, what is that data told? And so, I don't think we got an answer for that, so I would like to see that.
Okay.
That would really be a technical one, but that would be great.
All right, thank you.
And I do want to clarify, I'm not necessarily totally disagreeing with what he's saying, I'm just adding on to it. Definitely, the goals and all that, but it needs to be presented in a way that is, community friendly and where we can really understand. And for instance, what is flaring? We know it as seeing this fire shooting out, just like the whole difference between the black smoke and white smoke, and we used to be told the white smoke is good, black smoke is bad, and it's all bad. So we really do need a clear definition of what it means and how community can really receive it.
Thanks for clarifying. Thanks, LaDonna. Okay. Nick?
Since there's time, could I ask
Yeah,
if
we've
anybody
got 10 minutes.
could point me to a regulation close to stop work authority for environmental exceedances?
Regulation for stop work authority close to environmental.
Say that again, please.
Can anybody point me towards a spelled out regulation for protection for workers if they don't go along with work direction in order to prevent violating a regulation or an exceedance or something like that?
I have to be honest, that's definitely not our bailiwick, unfortunately. We're, our mission is to improve public health through improving air quality. So I can't, from our perspective, we don't have anything specific to that.
And that's my point, is the workers don't know where to find that either, you know what I mean? So we're talking about a lot of equipment, technology that's supposed to be improvements, but I feel like we've missed, you know, the frontline workforce that's, you know, right there, hands-on, doing most of the work, and it's tough, that's all I'm gonna say. So any help we could get where it's spelled out, you have the right to not violate these, you know, regulations and stuff, would make a big difference in the workplace. I'm curious to see, you know, how big of an impact that could make. Obviously, it's written for safety, that came out in 2017 after the Tony fire process safety in particular, but you know, nowhere is it written for environmental stuff, so it's tough. And I'd like to add that the amount of alarms and everything that the board operators see, you know, those are alarms for efficiency and running steady. And you know, there's initial alarm, you know, standard alarm, critical alarm, where you have to do something. But the compliance alarms are like, oops, you just went over, now you have to send an email. You know, there's not the same level of you're building towards something. And I would push back on that because, you know, there's a lot of studies and stuff, you know, trying to improve efficiency or get rid of jobs, however you want to look at it, but there's only so many alarms any board operator could ever handle. And so if you start adding environmental alarms, you're going to be adding jobs, which I would love to continue that argument. But I just want to point out that they're not the same thing. They don't have the same rigor. So I'd love to see that, you know, the third party auditors and stuff. I mean, if they could really dig in, I think that would be great, because I don't think that the amount of information and data really give you, you know, full kind of root cause analysis to stuff where you can really dig in and find ways to prevent this stuff. So while the conditions are, you know, typically different event to event, it's the same equipment, it's the same refinery, it's the same workers. So what are we after? You know, so I'd be excited to just dig deeper, but I feel like the workers are being overlooked in this process, and so I get what you said. It's not.
And we're not trying to. That's one of the main reasons we invited you, because you guys have a extreme working knowledge of the facilities in which you work, and that wisdom and that knowledge is very valuable to this process.
Thank you. Chuck.
And to the next point, you know, after spending decades, literally decades working in these facilities, we're the only things that haven't changed. Even as the equipment's changed, the people haven't changed. The only thing we did was get old, right? And we've moved from facility to facility, unit to unit, and then we watched our kids come in and start working with us, right? But to Nick's point also, even though we're skilled and trained, we go through a 5-year apprenticeship program. We do 9,000 hours of training, and we're supposed to be smart. And we're not only trained to use stop work authority, but we're obligated to use stop work authority. But we take our lead from operations. And also to Nick's point, when you're operators, when you got a 20, 25-year operator, this is rank and file. These guys are like drill sergeants. You know, I mean, I've been in the same unit with a head operator that I've worked with for decades. It's a different turnaround. When you go in there with an operator that's been there for less than 5 years, it's just different. You know, it's almost like you're a whole different relationship. And so when you look at environmental concerns, when you look at, you know, now it's like the rules change every time, right? And so we're trying to figure it out as we go along. So, you know, and refinery managers, and I think leadership always has the best intention. But at the end of a turnaround, shit gets squirrely, like you said, it's $1 million a day. They've already started selling product before that units went online. And so when they want the unit online, they want the unit online, and they're pushing. And we're as safe as we can be, right? And that's, and when you're working next to your kids and your friends' kids, everybody is as safe as they can be. But we're all looking, everybody is looking for guidance and safety.
All right.
Right, because that's really all we want. Everybody wants to go home safe. Right, and we want the community, believe me, if it's not safe inside the unit, it's not safe in the community. So we want the community to be safe. You know, so the next point, I want all the information that I can get, and because if, you know, the more we have, the safer and the better it is, and the better work environment it is.
Thank you both. Madonna, and then Chris has his hand up too, so I'll give you the floor
And I
first.
apologize, I can't see that far. I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned generations pretty much, work within the refinery. Do you find a large percentage of your workers and yourself, right, have what we call anyway the refinery cough?
The refinery
Cough.
Oh, I've had it for decades.
And the younger ones the same thing?
I'm from Vallejo. I'm a dropout from Vallejo. I'm a prodigy from Vallejo Unified School District.
Okay, so as it relates to where you're working and that generational, you're finding you guys have the cough and the younger ones you spoke of have that cough.
Well, you know, we all have issues. Now,
I'm talking about the cough.
well, you know, I can't tell you where it came from. I can tell you that I spent over 30 years in a hard hat and work boots, working in process refineries and power plants. And so in the units themselves, right? Not close to them, not living by them, but I mean inside those units with my son, my oldest daughter, my son-in-laws, my neighbors, right? And for a high school dropout that didn't graduate from high school, but got a GED, but got the blessing of having a middle-class job that now has been able to send my children to college, my daughters to college, to give them a different life, I'd gladly do it any day.
No, I can appreciate that.
And so I've had medical care. I've had medical care, I've had dental care. And so this is what this multi-billion-dollar business has given me. It's given me an opportunity to have dignity and respect and to have a retirement if I can live long enough to, you know, cash in. And if I can't, I've still lived a good life.
But do you recognize also the cost on the surrounding people, because it's not just those that are working? Wait a minute, the surrounding communities with increased health costs, shortened lifespans, constantly taking your children to the doctor if they live long enough, or yourself. There is seriousness to, serious documentation that just shows, without us having to even debate that, on does profits override people's lives?
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just telling you that's my story.
Yeah.
And my story is very unique to me and my family. That's not what I know.
All right, folks, I'm
That's all I
gonna
know.
jump in here because we are at time, and I appreciate that conversation. Chris, I saw you had your hand up, but I wanted to let folks know it is 7:30. I want to thank you all for being here, for spending your evening with us, and for the discussion. I know it's not easy information to take in or digest or react to on the spot, so I really appreciate that attention and what you're putting in here. I will collect any notes you want to leave for us and your exit survey so we can consider future meetings. We'll hang back for, a little bit additional questions while we clean up and whatnot, but with that, we'll officially end our meeting. And thank you again, everyone.
So even though it ended, I didn't get a chance to finish my last comment.
Sure.
And that was the fact that when we're in a room having that experience, within less than 5 minutes, you're next to a person and you hear that cough and you live this life, you ask them, you work at a refinery, and they're always, yeah, how do you know? It's that cough.
Thank you for that. All right. You wanna drop the Zoom?